Good evening to everybody. I just want to make sure that we mention all the sponsors and all the people responsible for this event tonight. I think it all started with a young lady that called me and she said, Rabbi, we want to do this thing over here in your community. Is it possible to get this to happen? I said, sure. They asked me, who do you recommend? I said, call Rabbi Mansour and we'll make it happen. And Baruch Hashem, she made some phone calls and the whole thing happened within a couple of days. Everything was done like very, very fast. Baruch Hashem. I think the main sponsors over here are the UJA. I think they have representatives over here also. Amudim, Chazaq, Emet, and All About Kindness. And of course we are in Ner Mordechai. We're all together working to try to bring this to our community, and we want to try to do this more often. Also, Bezrat Hashem. I just want to share a thought with you before I introduce. I don't think he needs an introduction, Rabbi Mansour. I think he probably needs to introduce me over here. But I just want to share a thought with you. You know, Baruch Hashem, for the past 30 years, I've been dealing with a lot of relationships. Not as a professional, as a Rav in the community. Baruch Hashem, I'm proud to say, we don't have one divorce in our community, Baruch Hashem, for the past 30 years from our immediate community that we're close to. And Hashem gives tremendous amount of siyata d'shmaya. There's definitely problems, but recently things have been getting very, very bad, and people are telling me, I just want to give up. I just can't take it anymore. So I just want to share with you a thought a little bit. Why did Hashem make it that it's so difficult for people to just be happy together? Why is it so difficult? Why did Hashem make it so difficult? Chazal tell us a concept. I want to read you the words. Chazal tell us, Shamayim va'aretz, two opposites. Ish ve'isha, a man and a woman, two opposites. Neshama ve'guf, the soul and the body, are two opposites. It's impossible for the body to be happy if you give it what the soul wants. And it's impossible for the soul to be happy if you give it what the body wants. You have to be able to find a balance between the neshama and the body to give each one of them something that they want, to be able to reach the perfect harmony, the balance that is necessary. It's the same thing with husbands and wives, parents and children, friends, boss and employees. There has to be the right balance. Hashem made it that we have to go through a serious challenge to be able to find that balance. I was trying to think of an example. When you have to put a puzzle inside of finish the puzzle and put the pieces together, when you do it, you get so much happiness after working hard. But if it was easy, you would not feel happy about it. So the only way we can really get simcha, the way Hashem programmed us and designed us, the only way we can get simcha is if we are able to take two opposites and unite them and make them work together. If the body and the neshama can work together, then you'll feel inner peace, you'll feel happy. You'll feel the gentle soul inside of you working together with your body. It's the same thing in a relationship. The only way you could feel happiness is if you take two opposite beings and put them together, and they have to try to feel and figure out the puzzle and put it together. That's the only way. So you're not supposed to run away from the challenges. You're supposed to embrace the challenges. You're supposed to use these challenges to get you to a point where now you're finally building something. You're finally creating a relationship, and that's how you reach happiness. So to all those people who are having these challenges out there, try to find somebody to guide you. Try to find somebody to help you, whether it's with a spouse, a child, a partner. Try to find somebody to help you figure out how to put the pieces together. Then you'll find true joy. And then, by the way, using the relationships, we'll be able to find true joy and connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Matan Torah is about also finding that balance between us and the relationship we're supposed to have with our Creator. And that's how we can find true joy. So without speaking too much longer, I want to introduce Rabbi Mansour. Everybody knows Rabbi Mansour is a speaker all over the world, world renowned. I grew up listening to his lectures. I remember one of my favorite lectures that inspired me and elevated me was about the Jew. And the letter that he read over there, I think from Mark Twain, right? That letter is a powerful, powerful speech that lit me up for many, many years. But without further ado, Rabbi Mansour, please.
Good evening. It's a distinct privilege to be here tonight in Queens, in the Bet Knesset Ner Mordechai, for a special lecture that's being hosted by our good friends at Amudim. This organization has taken upon themselves a very difficult task in dealing with a very sensitive topic that most people probably would not want to get their hands dirty with. But the good people at Amudim identified a problem in the community which needs experts and a lot of know-how to navigate, and they rolled up their sleeves and they're really making a difference. Their reputation precedes them. So I was asked, not as a professional, but as a rabbi, to talk about what I guess is, on a more broad spectrum, the relationship of Ben Adam lahavero, because that's where all these things, when we talk about relationships, it's Ben Adam lahavero, it's man to his fellow. So I'd like to begin with the first 4 words of Pirkei Avot, which you probably heard. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. And that's it. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Now talk about a very unimpressive way of starting a book. I mean, who doesn't know that? We learned that in first grade. Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah from Sinai. Is anybody going to fall off their chair when they hear that? When you open up a book, you try to open up with a punch to catch the listener. When you're making a speech, a rabbi is never supposed to say, the pasuk says. Everybody falls asleep, another guy with a pasuk. And over here, the Mishnah Pirkei Avot starts, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai, and the reader says, Peshita, it's obvious. There was a great rabbi called Rabbi Obadiah Bar Tenura. So he explains why the Mishnah opens up with Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. And he says, Pirkei Avot is a selection of Mishnayot. What are Mishnayot? Mishnah is synonymous with the word halakha. Anytime you hear the word Mishnah, Mishnah means halakha. And all Mishnayot talk about halachot. So if you want to learn Hilchot Shabbat, don't start with Shulchan Aruch. That's the last book. The first stop is Mishnayot Shabbat. And if you want to learn the laws of marriage, Mishnah Kiddushin. And if you want to learn the laws of the holiday, Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, Mishnah Sukkah, Mishnah Yomah. And we all agree, and it's obvious, where does halakha come from? Halakha comes from Moshe, from Sinai, from God. You can't go to Barnes and Nobles and find a professor that's going to write a book on Hilchot Shabbat because it's not his domain. Halakha is the domain of the divine. However, the Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot do not have any halachot in them. It's a book of ethics. It's a book of conduct. Or as we would say in Hebrew, derech eretz. It teaches you how to behave between you and your fellow. It'll tell you, be patient, don't get angry, give the benefit of the doubt, be hospitable. It'll tell you, be a good friend, be a good neighbor, don't go after jealousy, curb your temptations, don't seek acclaim. These are all in the realm of personality traits, as we call it in the yeshiva, midot. And if you go to Barnes and Nobles, there's a whole section of books that are written on ethics and morality and decency. As a matter of fact, there's a big encyclopedia, the Book of Etiquette, written by Emily Post. And she'll tell you the right thing to do, at least according to her opinion, in every situation of life. Today, there are ethicists in the hospitals that make decisions between right and wrong, how to deal with their fellow, with the patients. Ethical boards. Lest anybody thinks, says Rabbi Obadiah Bar Tenura, that these ethics of Pirkei Avot are man-made, like those books. Lest you make that mistake and think that these were ideas that the rabbis themselves professed. They were their own ideas, their own inventions. Says the Rab that just like the halachot of Shabbat and the halachot of Yom Kippur and the halachot of Kiddushin and the law is divine, ethics are also from Sinai. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Even this part of Torah comes from Sinai. When God gave the Torah, there was two parts. There was a legislative part, Asur, Mutar, Tameh, Tahor. And then there was another part of the Torah that's just as important. And that's to teach the person how to conduct himself and how to behave. Pirkei Avot is not just a bunch of suggestions or good ideas. Pirkei Avot is just as much of Torah as the rest. It is no less than Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Yom Kippurim. The Torah demands from us not only to be a halachic Jew, but to be decent as well. And decency was given at Sinai. And that's why it's a Hidush. When you read it, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, even this, yes. And I think it's neglected because when we talk about Matan Torah, which obviously we're creeping up to the day, a few weeks, Shiavu Alenu Letovah. So if I would ask you, where in the Torah do we study Matan Torah? You'll say Parashat Yitro. You're right, that's where we read about the dramatic events. But there's a postscript to Matan Torah that's written in Parashat Mishpatim. That part of Matan Torah, people skip over it because it's a little technical and they really don't understand what's taking place. But over there's a great message. I'm in Parashat Mishpatim, Perek Chav Dalet. They're in front of the mountain, Har Sinai. Moshe builds a Mizbeach, an altar. Well, if there's a Mizbeach, there's going to be sacrifices. Moshe Rabbeinu starts to sacrifice, Korbanot. Well, if there's sacrifices, there's going to be blood. Moshe Rabbeinu takes Aganot. Aganot are flasks or jugs. And he catches the blood. And the Pasuk says, how much blood did he put in the Agan? Vayikach Moshe Hatzi Hadam. Half the blood. May I ask you a question? What does half the blood mean? I'll tell you the way I understood it before I came here tonight. Half the blood means, about half. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't have an apparatus to measure exactly half the blood. The point is, it's close enough. If you look at it, you say, oh, it's about half. That's the way I understood. Until I read the Rashi. Rashi comes along and says, he took half the blood, and then she asks the question, Mi halako? Who divided it? Rashi's question basically is, who is capable of dividing it to make sure that it's 50.00? Mi halako. As great as Moshe is, he's a prophet, but he's not an expert in dividing blood in one shot to make it exactly half. Because when the Torah says Hatzi, it means Hatzi. So who helped him? So Rashi says a tremendous Chidush. Malach ba v'chelko. God sent out an angel from heaven in order to assist Moshe in this great divide. Wow. We talk about angels doing great things that they're definitely qualified for, like destroying Sodom, like healing Abraham. But to send an angel to involve himself in weights and measures, it seems that he's overqualified. Why would God need such a miracle? What's the lesson of the blood in the Agan that's 50%? Well, let's see what he did with the blood. It says he took the blood in one Agan and he sprinkled it on the Mizbeach. a sprinkling ceremony, and then he took the other half of the blood and he sprinkled it on the people. A strange ceremony indeed. What is the lesson? Why would the Torah tell us such a ceremony pre-Matan Torah? This happened the day before we received the Torah. There was a great rabbi called Rabbi Hutner, Pahad Yitzhak, and he explains, if we were to ask somebody, what makes a person religious? A religious Jew. So the first question we would say, is he Shomer Shabbat? Yes. How many minutes after sunset does he wait? 72 minutes. There you go. That sounds religious to me. And sometimes he even waits 90 minutes. Okay, no more to be asked. If somebody waits 90 minutes for Motzei Shabbat, all the stars are out by then. He's religious. Some people will say, what's his kashrut level? Bet Yosef, Bishul Yisrael Sefaradi, Yashan, he keeps Yashan all year long. Even after Pesach, he keeps Yashan. Okay? Halab Yisrael goes without saying. Very, very carefully, he hasn't eaten a strawberry in 30 years. And this is I'm not saying it's not a barometer to judge religious behavior. It definitely is a barometer. I mean, how should we judge religion? Shabbat, kashrut, and then the next one would be tarat mishpacha. Yes, they go to mikveh, they're careful in the laws. And then if you'd ask the person who's shomer Shabbat 90 minutes, that only eats Bet Yosef Sefaradi, and is very careful on tarat mishpacha, they say, but what type of person is he or she? She's a little conceited, she has arrogance, and he's a miser, and he has a little anger streak in him. Okay, but that has nothing to do with religion. That's just personality. But bottom line for the Shadchan, check the box. Religion, and he has some personality traits which, who cares anyway? That's not the way we measure. Says Rav Hutner, that's your mistake. And that's why before Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu made an experiment that had to go exactly and precisely perfect. Two aganot, 50% blood in one and 50 in the other. And what is Moshe teaching the people? 50% of this law is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. That's the laws between man and God. And the other 50% of this law is sprinkled on the people, because the other 50% is man to man. It's a divide right down the middle. Which is more important? They're equal. And you can't be religious if you're not a Shomer Shabbat, and you can't be called religious if you're not a mensch, and you're not a person, and you don't have good personality, and you don't have midot. Because the same God at Sinai that gave us the laws of kashrut is the same law, the same Sinai that gave us the laws of Ben Adam L'Havero. And there isn't a tilt. When God gives us the luchot, it's written in Parashat Ekev, luchot ha'even, but the word luchot is missing a vav. And therefore it can be read luhat, which sounds like one stone. Well, it was two stones, but it's written as one. And Rashi says, why? To teach me that both sides were equal, like one stone. Now, I don't think it only means in size, but it means in importance, in priority. The right side of the luchot were the laws between man and God, and the left side were the laws between man and his fellow. And the pasuk says it was one law, they are shaveh. And nobody should think, well, the right side's a little heavier. The ceremonies and the rituals, that's the important part of religion. And the other stuff, whipped cream. It's nice, it's extra. It's a humrah. It's nice, we don't say no, but it's not critical. Wrong. You cannot call yourself a religious Jew if you do not have the midot and the derech eretz and the mutual respect that Pirkei Avot demands of us. So we have now the time between Pesach and Shavuot. I'm going to tell you now you've heard, but I don't think you've asked the most important question. You've heard about the students of Rabbi Akiva, in a big yeshiva, 24,000 students, very reputable. And we all know that they perished in a short amount of time. They died a very, very painful death, asphyxiation, can't breathe. And we all know why they died. We learned it in first grade again. Lo nahagu kavod ze lazeh. Whatever that means, there was a lack of respect. They were great learners, but when it came to mutual respect for each other, there was a deficiency. Far be it from me to judge the students of Rabbi Akiva. And I say it with the greatest respect, but the Gemara says it. So we cannot whitewash away their deficiency. The Gemara says, Lo nahagu kavod ze lazeh. Whatever it means, they didn't tell each other good morning, maybe they were a little rude. However you want to learn lo nagu kavod, I'll leave that to your imagination. My question is, where do we see in the Torah that if you don't have good people skills, you hayav mitah? Why is that punishable by death? I think we overlook this. We assume, oh yeah, they didn't respect each other, so they died. Where do we see ben adam lahaviro is punishable by death? Yes, mehalil Shabbat sekila, but guess what? Not so easy to get a death penalty in our Torah. The Gemara says in Makot that if they killed one person in 70 years, it's a lot, because there's a lot of technicalities how to kill a person. And all of a sudden over here, Ben Adam Nahavero, Lo Nagu Kavod Zelazeh, boom, Makkah, Magefa, 24,000. Where do we see in Torah that Ben Adam Nahavero gets a death penalty? It's like somebody double parking his car. They catch him, they give him the electric chair. Electric chair, give him a ticket. What's the explanation? I'd like to say a big hadush, and I say it with all the respect and with some fear and trepidation as well, because it's a big hadush. Did you ever hear of a concept that's called shimush tamidei hachamim? What is shimush tamidei hachamim? Shimush Talmidei Hachamim means that it's a big mitzvah to observe Talmidei Hachamim, to maybe, like we would say, to intern by Talmidei Hachamim, to have an apprenticeship with Talmidei Hachamim, to watch them, to study them. It's called Shimush. How important is Shimush? The Gemara actually says, Shimusha yoter milimuda. Shimush Talmidei Hachamim is even more important than learning. Now don't believe that for a second. Nothing is more important than learning. Talmud Torah keneged kulam, period. But how could the Gemara say that there's something even more important than learning? Observing Talmidei Hachamim, that's more important than learning? Has v'shalom. The Gaon Mevilna says that when you observe Talmidei Hachamim, that's a form of learning. That's a form of Talmud Torah. So he says, in Talmud Torah, there's two ways you could learn. From a book, and then from watching, from looking. And the more effective of the two ways of learning Torah is Shimush. I'll give you an example. A personal example that happened to me. I was in yeshiva in Israel, 1986, in Jerusalem. If you remember, those days they didn't have cell phones. We had a payphone in the yeshiva. And my parents would call once a week. The phone call only lasted a minute. And then we tried to reverse the charges. And it wasn't a what should I say? It wasn't a call where we just chatter. It was, are you still alive? What's your vitals? What's your blood pressure? What's your pulse? And that's it. I'll talk to you next week at the same time. But it was always an exciting moment, those few minutes that we're able to talk to our parents overseas. Today the kids go with a phone, they have FaceTime, they're talking to their parents 10 times a day. Anyway, my time, my parents would call, was usually on Sunday nights, about 10 o'clock. And you know that's your spot at the payphone. Anyway, we were praying Arbit that night in the yeshiva, and they were a little late. And now they say, Alinu l'shabeach, and also a guy comes upstairs and says, Eliyahu, your parent, your mother, on the phone, America. That's like Mashiach. So my knee-jerk reaction is to run, and then I said, wait. After Alinu Shabbat, the Ashkenazim say Kaddish. So I waited for the Kaddish, but my one foot's out, and I'm listening to the Kaddish, and then they say Baruchu. Baruchu, Hashem, and I answer Baruch Hashem, and then I run. And I speak to my parents, and send more money, and whatever it is. And that's it. Right after I finish the phone call, one of the older Bahurim comes to me and says, Mansour, the Rosh Hashiva wants to talk to you. Now I'm thinking, what did I do? What avon did I do? I'm going through all the averot that I've done and potentially figuring out an answer. First of all, deny everything. No matter what he says, it wasn't me. I'm thinking, what am I going to answer? I don't even know what I did. I come into Rosh Hashiva's office, which is very odd. At 10:30 at night to call the boy into his office. And he looks at me, and I wasn't even looking at him because I was so embarrassed. He says, Mansour, what do you know about Baruchu that I don't know? I lifted my eyes up. I said, I don't know anything about Baruchu. And he said, you must know something. I was watching you. You got a call from the States. Most kids would just run downstairs, but you waited to answer Baruchu. Tell me the secret that you know. I don't let you leave until you explain to me what you know about Baruchu that forced you to remain even when the call from America was pulling you and attracting you. So I looked at the Rosh Hashiva and I said, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I never read anything about Baruchu. I cannot tell you any facts about it. I don't know its spiritual level or components, but I can tell you one thing. When I was in 8th grade, we had a minyan in the school, and there was a big rabbi, Hacham Baruch ben Hayim, was the Alav Shalom, my rabbi. He was in charge of the minyan. We were 13 years old, and it was at the end of the prayers, and me and my friends were talking, and I guess there was a Kaddish that took place. I don't remember it. And I guess there was a Baruchu, but I was talking right through it. Hacham Baruch Alav Shalom turned to the dean. His name was Rabbi Greenis Alav Shalom. And he says to him, not talking to me, Rav Moshe, Mansour just lost $1 million. And Rabbi Greenis answers, at least $1 million. And then they walk away. I said, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? $1 million? More than $1 million? And then the rabbi comes to me and says, must be what you were talking to your friend is worth more than $1 million because you gave up a baruchu that's worth $1 million. So it must be that conversation had great value. On that day, I learned the value of a baruchu. Not from a book, but from the reaction of my rabbi. We learn a lot from shimush. And from that day, I can never miss a baruchu. I still see my Rebbe's face. Every time they say baruchu, $1 million. And no matter what happens, I have to answer it. It's not because I learned it. I saw it. I have an advantage. That's called shimush tabidei hachamim. I was once in Morocco, and I saw the daughter of the Baba Sali. And they said, this is a great tzaddiket, get a beracha. I said, of course. And then somebody said, you know this lady? She's a very old woman. She never got jealous. She never got jealous. It's a great accomplishment. So I went up to the Rebbe and I said, Rebbe, I'd like a blessing, but I'd like to ask you a question. Could you tell me how you cured yourself from jealousy? She says, oh, that's easy. I was young with my father. It was by a rich man's house, collecting money for the yeshiva, whatever it was. And after he stayed there for a few nights with me, so he left, he thanked the Balabayit, and he wanted to give the Balabayit, the rich man, a gift. What is he going to give the rich man? He doesn't need money. So my father bought for his daughter a doll. So my father was wrapping the doll up, and I saw it. And I said to my father, the Baba Sali, I want it. My father looked at me. His eyes were bulging out of his face. His cheeks turned beet red. And on top of his lungs, he says, Kin'ah! Jealousy! As if I was about to eat cyanide. That face and that reaction of my father burnt any vestige of jealousy from my body. I'm cured. And I said, it's amazing, because I read the Mishnah Pirkei Avot, HaKin'ah motzi et ha'adam min ha'olam. I mean, that's intimidating. It's serious business. Kin'ah can ruin you. It'll take you out of this world. And I've read the Mishnah 100 times, and guess what? I'm not immune. Because that's when you read it from a book. But when you see the Baba Sali's face, the Shimush Tamid Akamim, that will have a greater impact. With that introduction, I'd like to present a novel theory. The students of Rabbi Akiva were not just students, they were transmitters. They're called Ba'alei Mesorah. The Torah is given in a tradition, rabbi to student, rabbi to student. And they were in a very key position to be the next transmitters of Torah to the following generation. And as a transmitter of Torah, as a Baal Mesorah, you must be very careful that you present and transmit the Torah as it is, and not, God forbid, present a deficient version or a perverted version. It's a great responsibility. What would have happened if the students of those 24,000 would see those rabbis? What would they see? They would see diligent learners. They would see matmidim. They would see disciplined students that study around the clock, which is very important. And you know what they would also see? They would see that mutual respect is not as important. And that's a perversion of Torah. And if you are in charge of transmitting, you are transmitting the wrong message. And now you're not just not having respect for your friend, that's already contemptuous in the Torah itself, in the transmission. And that is Hayab Bita. Because if a student walks away and says, well, you know what I learned from my rabbi? I see it every day. Learning is important, mitzvot are important, and ben adam lahavero, it's not as important. And that's not true. And therefore the Torah would be given over in the wrong way. And therefore Borei Olam had to take these transmitters away in order that the message should not be compromised. So yes, ben adam lahavero, if you're a transmitter, is punishable by death. Well, I have some good news. Not all the students of Rabbi Akiva passed. Actually, there were 5 survivors. One of them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I'd like to tell you a story that happened last year. Last year, as my custom, I went to Meron. It was a special year after the tragedy. And they had invited me, some of the tzaddikim, to light the, or a bonfire for Rabbi Shimon. So I was very, very appreciative. They gave me the stick, they lit it up, climb up on the ladder. And as I'm about to light, a big tzaddik tells me, hey, wait. What's the reason you're lighting? What's the reason? When in Rome? Everybody's lighting bonfires. I don't know. You don't know? You're just lighting? Come back down. And he said, we need you to light with kavanot. I don't know any kavanot of lighting bonfires. Maybe because the Zohar is a fire. Easy one. He said, I will tell you a chidush that I heard from the Yenuka, the great rabbi in Israel. And he said, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is famous in the Talmud for many statements. But one, he said not one time and not two times. He repeated it 3 times in different Gemariyot. I have a copy of it here, Gemara Berachot. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, Noach le'adam, sheyapil atzmo letoch kivshan ha'esh, ve'al yalbin penei habero. A person should rather jump into a fiery furnace and not embarrass his fellow. It is so important to keep the dignity of another person, to keep it in the right esteem. It's important not to hurt and say hurtful words to our fellow, to agonize them. So much so that it's a better option to jump into a fire than embarrass or speak disparagingly against our friend. Said the Yenuka, when you light the fire of Rabbi Shimon, that's what they want you to remember. Ben Adam lahavero. Jump into this fire before you abuse somebody. That's what the Torah would rather. Before you choose to abuse somebody in any which way, it's a better option to jump in the fire. Most people that jump in the fire are not coming out, and it's still a better option. That's how serious the crime is. And that's the Midorah of Rabbi Shimon, to remember the fire of Ben Adam lahavero. And I added, and I said, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai now becomes the new transmitter, and he had to undo the 24,000 shalom nahagu kavod zeh lazeh that were giving a mismessage, a wrong message. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had to say, yes, of course, Torah, Kabbalah, Zohar, Halachot, but don't forget, it's a 50-50 law. Moshe kibed Torah Sinai, he received both parts. We sprinkle half the blood on the Mizbeach and half the blood on the people. And nobody should think that you could call yourself religious if you're just a ceremonial or a ritual Jew. You must have derech eretz and a proper behavior. And if you're not a good husband, and if you're not a good brother, and if you're not a good partner, and you don't have a good wife, that's part of religiosity. No matter when you finish Shabbat, and no matter how kosher your kitchen is, you're missing a very integral part of Judaism. I get calls from shadchanim from time to time, or from parents that want to get their kids married. A mother calls me up, Rabbi Mansour, can I talk to you about my daughter? Yes, of course. She's so-and-so, she's so-and-so, she reads the whole Hallel on her daughter with a berakah. I said, okay, fine. Sounds like a very, very exceptional girl. She says, now can I tell the Rav what I'm looking for? Yeah, fine. We want a boy who any question she asks him in halakha, he'll know the answer. I said, listen, Chama v'ja'ala shalom. He passed away already, so. But can I ask you a question? Where did you get this barometer of that's what makes a good husband, that he's able to answer every question? So you don't care if he has a short temper. You don't care if he talks not nice. You don't care how he treats your daughter. You just care that he gets the right answers for the halakha questions. So why don't you marry a computer? But that's the perversion that we have today in Torah. Because we're so corrupted in thinking that that's what a Ben Torah is. He knows everything. At 22 years old, no less. But is he a good person? Is he a proper person? That's an extra. That's nice. There's a famous Hadush from Rabbi Eli Salanta when he talks about the pasuk in the Torah that talks about a parent giving over his daughter in marriage. There's a pasuk like that a father gives over his daughter in marriage. In the old days it was very customary. So it says, the father's talking, Et biti natati la ish hazeh. I gave my daughter to this ish. Salanta says, wow, ish it's a generic word. We would expect the Torah to say, Et biti natati la hacham hazeh. Don't you want a son-in-law who's a hacham? Et biti natati la tzaddik hazeh, la hasid hazeh, la kadosh hazeh. No, et biti natati la ish hazeh. Says Rabbi Eli Salanta. You know what an ish is? He might not be a hacham, and he might not be the biggest tzaddik or the hasid, but an ish is a mensch. And that's the greatest qualification. It biti natati la ish. Because the Torah says, before you can become a tzaddik and a hasid and a kadosh, you have to be a mensch. You have to be an ish. That's the entry point. If you're not an ish, nothing starts. But I'm sorry today, the corruption that we have in thinking that religious behavior is only measured by ben adam la makom and not by the ben adam la havero, and personality and midot. It's secondary, it's tertiary against the more important things. It's a corruption of Torah. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu had to make that 50-50 ceremony, to remind everybody that it's not the case. It's one law and both sides are equal. We're coming to the holiday of Shavuot, and we read a book on Shavuot, the Megillat Ruth. I asked the question, actually somebody came to me from the shul a few weeks ago, one of the men. Rabbi Mansour, quick answer. Could you just remind me, why do we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot? I said, it's an easy one. Bring me the book. It's only 4 chapters. I said, for sure it has to say the word Shavuot in there somewhere. So I just very quickly, I'm looking. I'm sorry to tell you, I didn't find the word Shavuot once. I said, but for sure there's Har Sinai. I squeezed it again. No Har Sinai, no Shavuot, no 10 Commandments, no cheesecake, no nothing. And then I started to question myself. Yeah, it's a great story, don't get me wrong. It's a great story. But why does that become the story of Shavuot? So some say because it happened around Shavuot time. So it's like the season. It was a seasonal story. So therefore, all right, Ketzir Hitim, Ketzir Seorim, Shavuot time. All right, nice answer. Some say, well, it's the story of the birth of King David, and King David was born on Shavuot. So therefore, which is interesting, that answer. So really, it's not the story of Ruth. Actually, we read the whole book for the last pasuk, and it sounds like the first 4 chapters is just to get us to the last word, David. And there it is. Okay, that's the book. Although we call it Megillat Ruth, But it's really not about Ruth, it's about David. All right, it's a nice answer. But then I looked in the Midrash and I found something incredible. Amar Rab Ze'ira, Megillah zu, אין בה לא טומאה ולא טהרה, לא איסור ולא היתר. You have to look pretty hard in Megillah Ruth to try to find any halachot. It's not a book of legislation. It's a story. ולמה נכתבה? The Midrash asks, so why is it written? And I'm asking a further question, and why do we read it? ללמדך כמה שכר טוב לגומלי חסדים. It wants to teach us the importance of being a nice person. Because it's a story about a nice person. Ruth was a nice person. This is a lady that was born in royalty with a silver spoon in her mouth. And at some point in her life, she decides to do the ultimate chesed for her destitute mother-in-law. She had every right to turn back and go back home and live a life of luxury with all the amenities. And instead, she escorts, at great danger, mind you, her mother-in-law back to Israel. And she knows good and well that she might never get married because she's controversial. She comes from Moab. It's not so simple that we're allowed to marry them. So she's willing to give that up as well. And she escorts her mother-in-law back, and now her mother-in-law is destitute and poverty-stricken. And she accepts upon herself to go to the welfare and get the food stamps herself and pick all the gleanings from the field with all the other poor people. Something that I know she was not accustomed to. I'm sure back home she had servants. And now she finds herself in a field with the paupers of the time fighting for a few kernels of barley and wheat. All what? Nice to her mother-in-law. And then eventually we talk about she has a baby. And the Megillah says, when the neighbors saw that Ruth had a baby, they said, Yulad ben Naomi. Naomi had a baby. That's not true. But the Gemara says that she had so much love for her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law lost 2 children, and she probably had a craving like every lady does to raise a child. So she gave the child to Naomi to share in the rearing of this child, to give her the pleasure. So the neighbor said, look, Naomi had a baby. She's a mother again. Ruth shared that very, very personal and private experience of raising a child that most people would not share with anybody. And Ruth goes down to be a very compassionate person, very kind-hearted person, to the extent that somebody who is not compassionate, we say, is ruthless. They lack the midah of Ruth. And that becomes the story on Shavuot. You know why? Because it's reminding you. Yes, you must keep all the halachot, tum'ah, betara, isur, ve'eter. But don't forget, the Torah demands from you to be a nice person. That's part of Torah. There's a nice person clause. And therefore, read the story of Ruth. On Shavuot, there cannot be a more pertinent story, because this is the part that the people are they're going to neglect. The other part, Moshe Kibet Torah Sinai, they know the other part is from Sinai, but they know that this part is just as much, and therefore it has to reinforce it. The Ben Adam Lahabero. So you cannot come and tell me that you wear 2 tefillin and your mezuzot are written from the best sofer and you donated a Sefer Torah and you make all sorts of donations to the synagogue. Very good, that's it. That's half a story, it's half a book. How do you talk to your spouse? What's it got to do with anything? How do you talk to your children? What's one thing to do with the other? Well, that's personal. We're going to give up my personal life. I'm telling you my religious credentials. And then once we start to measure the Torah on both sides of the Luchot, we'll start to see that a lot of people we thought are religious are really not. And they become exposed as half-baked. And that's the important lesson that we come to talk when we talk about relationships. It's all about midot. So you can't be a good Jew and a bad friend at the same time. And you can't be a good Jew and a bad neighbor at the same time. It doesn't go. There was one Rosh Yeshiva, a man came to him and said, what do you say about all those religious Jews that cheat and lie and steal? He says, what do I say about them? The same thing I say about all those religious Jews that eat on Yom Kippur. He said, religious Jews? Jews who eat on Yom Kippur are not religious? And the Rosh Yeshiva said, neither are those. That was his point. That we measure it if you eat on Kippur or not. There was a great rabbi called Rav Reismandel. Reismandel, after the Holocaust, he came to a certain shul upstate, and it was before Sukkot. He tells the story himself. He says, and now everybody's going to buy lulavim and etrogim. So how do they buy it in that shul? They put a bunch of lulav and etrogs on the bima, like this. And everybody comes, they pick it up, they look at it, they pick it up. First one, okay, looks good to me. And they walk away. Weissmandel says, what kind of people are these? They don't even have any seriousness about this mitzvah. The first one they pick up, and they don't even look at the etrog. To us, we have a loop. We have an X-ray to look inside of it, to have all sorts of a diagnosis. And here, first one in the hands, ben abba beyado. So he says, in my mind, I didn't judge them so favorably. Anyway, the next day is the first day of the holiday. So what happens? They had a custom in that shul that they would invite a special hazan to lead the Hallel. So I'm sitting next to this guy, he says, and they come to him, the Gabbai, please, we'd like you to honor the congregation by reciting the Hallel. And he says, I cannot. Yesterday I told a lie. My mouth isn't suitable to represent the congregation. Rav Weissmandel said, these are the real Jews. He says, they take lulav and etrog, but they're also careful. They're also careful that they tell the truth and that they're honest. And so much so that a man cannot be the hazan because he feels his mouth is unworthy. He says, I might have judged these people wrong. These are balanced people. I was only judging them because of the way they perfunctorily take a lulav and etrog casually. But these people are actually deep. They're very careful also on midot and personality. And that's the lesson that I say tonight. There is no greater preparation for Shavuot than, of course, to be halachic Jews. Far be it from me to minimize the halakha standpoint. And I know the risk of such a derasha to many people who are not so halachically religious. And they hear this, you see? As if this speech gives them a heter to be a mehalel Shabbat so long as they're a nice guy. And that's not the case. Because again, you need both halves. And if you're just a nice guy and you're eating the nevilot u'trefot, you get the same problem. But I'm talking to religious Jews that are halachic Jews. We're talking to people that are modest, that are kovei ha'itim la Torah. That's not our issue. By and large, we keep halakha, or we want to keep halakha. We understand the importance of it. It is us that need to be reminded that Noach le'adam sheyapil atzmo letoch kivshan ha'esh ve'al yalbin penei havero. People are sensitive. People are fragile. More than a piece of lali glass. And therefore we have to treat our fellow with white gloves. And so much so that it is a better option to jump into the fire of Rabbi Shimon just to preserve the dignity of a fellow Jew. Ruth is read on Shavuot not because of any halachic consideration, but because she was gomelet chesed. She had a good relationship with her mother-in-law, which is a challenge under any situation, let alone the situation of Ruth and Naomi. And it's reminding you, this is the way the Torah wants you to look. You have to look like these people. They were religious on both fronts. The bloods must be sprinkled on the Mizbeach, and the bloods must be sprinkled on the people. Our Torah is a Torah of Ben Adam LaMakom as well as Ben Adam LaHabero. Thank you very much.